My sister announced her engagement at my wedding, and the sound of that silver spoon tapping against the champagne flute's crystal didn't sound like a celebration. It sounded like the bell announcing the start of a boxing round for which I hadn't trained. Ting, ting. That sharp sound cut through the humid, magnolia-scented air of the Savannah Historic Hotel ballroom, silencing the jazz band that had been playing softly in the background. My fingers, which moments before had been intertwined with Liam's, my husband of exactly 2 hours, froze. I knew that rhythm. I knew the cadence of that beat. It was the sound of Sarah taking control, the sound of my invisibility being decreed once again, precisely on the day that was, theoretically, supposed to be the only day of my entire life that belonged only to me. The ballroom's air conditioning seemed to be fighting a losing battle against the stifling Georgia heat outside, but at that moment, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I looked at the center of the head table. The floral arrangement of white hydrangeas and pale pink roses, which I had spent months choosing so as not to overshadow the classic decor, suddenly seemed wilted before my sister's vibrant presence. She stood, radiant in a champagne-colored bridesmaid dress that, conveniently, was light enough to be mistaken for white under the right light. Her smile was the most dangerous weapon in that room. Perfect, practiced, dazzling. "Excuse me for interrupting the newlyweds' waltz." Sarah's voice floated through the microphone, sweet like iced tea with too much sugar, the kind that leaves a bitter taste in your throat after you swallow. "But love is a funny thing, isn't it? It overflows, it's contagious." She paused dramatically, her blue eyes sweeping across the packed ballroom of 300 Charleston and Savannah elite guests. Everyone was mesmerized. My mother, Eleanor, already had her hands to her chest, her eyes sparkling with a proud anticipation she had never, in 30 years, directed at me. My father, Robert, smiled that distracted smile of someone who paid the bill and hopes the show is worth it. I gripped the linen tablecloth beneath the table. My fingers brushed the sharp edge of a brown envelope I had strategically hidden there before dinner was served. The paper felt rough against my sensitive skin, a brutal contrast to the silk of my dress. That envelope was heavy. Not physically, but gravitationally. It held the weight of 30 years of neglect, of silent comparisons, of being the other daughter. The daughter who was smart, but not brilliant, pretty, but not dazzling. The daughter who served as a backdrop for the main star. "And today," Sarah continued, turning to look at Blake, her boyfriend of 6 months, "under this very roof where my little sister is starting her journey, Blake asked me the most important question of my life." The collective gasp in the room sucked all the oxygen from around me. Blake, an Atlanta investment banker with perfectly coiffed hair and that aspen winter tan, stood up. He looked a bit pale, his smile wavering, but he held Sarah's hand, the diamond on her finger, and my God, how did she get the ring on so fast? Caught the light from the crystal chandelier and shot blinding beams across the room. It was bigger than mine. Of course it was. Everything in Sarah's life had to be bigger, brighter, louder. "I said yes," she shouted, and the applause was deafening. People stood up. My guests. At my wedding. They turned their backs on Liam and me to applaud the golden couple. I watched my mother run to them, tears streaming, embracing Sarah as if she had just returned from war, completely ignoring that she was stepping on the train of my wedding dress to get there. I can't believe she did that, Liam whispered beside me, his voice hoarse with contained anger. His hand squeezed mine tightly, an anchor trying to keep me from being swept away by the current. Audrey, I'm so sorry. I'm going to go take that microphone from her. No, I said. My voice came out strange, metallic. Don't do that. I looked at the envelope under my fingers again. There was a recurring symbol in my life, the pearl necklace I was wearing. It was an inheritance from Grandma Catherine. Mom always said that pearls represented purity and patience. Patience, Audrey, she would say when I complained that Sarah had gotten the bigger room. Patience, Audrey, when Sarah accidentally destroyed my science project. The pearls were cold and heavy on my neck now, like a collar of submission. They represented the silence I had been trained to keep so as not to disturb the harmony of the perfect Henderson family. But harmony is a lie when the melody is forced. I remembered where I was 30 minutes before, in the bridal suite bathroom, locked in, my hands trembling so much I almost tore the test results when opening them. I had given those Heritage and Roots DNA kits last Christmas. An innocent joke. Let's see where we come from. Maybe we have Scottish royal blood. Everyone laughed. Mom grew tense, I recall now, spilling some wine on the Persian rug, but quickly covered it up. Dad didn't even care. Sarah joked that her test would come back 100% goddess. I opened my email this morning. The notification read, "New family connections found." Curiosity was stronger than bridal protocol. I clicked, and as the hairdresser adjusted my veil, my world silently crumbled in digital form. What I saw on the screen wasn't just a family tree. It was the map of a disaster zone. I printed the results at the hotel reception's printer, put them in the envelope, and went down to the altar. I was going to keep it. I swear I was. I was going to wait until after the honeymoon. I was going to have a civilized conversation. But then, ting, ting, ting. Sarah was now kissing Blake to applause. She looked at me over his shoulder. That look. It wasn't apologetic. It was defiant. A subtle reminder. This is my world, Audrey. You just live in it. The smell of dinner, herb-crusted lamb and roasted potatoes, suddenly made me nauseous. My mother's perfume, Chanel Cinco, seemed to have saturated the air, sweet, suffocating. I tasted metallic blood in my mouth where I have bitten my cheek. Liam, Elsa, letting go of his hand. Do you love me? More than anything, he replied, looking at me concerned. You're pale. Do you want to leave? No, he replied, and felt an icy, almost psychotic calm take hold of me's limbs. It was the calm at the eye of the hurricane. I want to make un toast. Liam saw something in Melzolis, Kiopi, that made him flinch. He didn't see the sweet, compliant bride he had dated for 4 years. He saw someone new. Someone who had just realized that the only way to break free from chains is to shatter them, even if it means bringing the roof down on our heads. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping across the polished wooden floor was loud, dissonant. It cut through the applause. Some guests turned, surprised, suddenly remembering there was a bride in the room. I picked up my champagne flute with me left hand and the brown envelope with me right. The paper was damp with the sweat from my palm. I walked toward the small stage where Sarah still held the microphone like a royal scepter. The band's drummer looked at me confused. Blake's father, a stern New Yorker who seemed to disapprove of the South, adjusted his tie. Arthur Henderson, my father's business partner and honorary uncle of the family, was at the head table, pouring himself more whiskey. He always drank a lot at family parties. Today, he would drink for a different reason, though he didn't know it yet. "Audrey, dear," Mom shouted, trying to maintain control of the narrative. "Come congratulate your sister. Isn't it wonderful? A double wedding in the family in less than a year." I reached Sarah. She smiled at me, that condescending smile of someone expecting gratitude for liveling up the party. "Thanks, Sarah," I said, still without the microphone. "Thanks, sis," she whispered, leaning in for a fake kiss on the cheek. "Don't be mad. You know Blake is impulsive. And honestly, the party was getting a bit dull." There it was. The confirmation. Casual cruelty disguised as spontaneity. I reached out and took the microphone from her fingers. She resisted for a millisecond, surprised, but let go. I turned to the crowd. The envelope in my hand felt like it weighed a ton. I could feel the secret pulsating inside. "Thank you all." My voice echoed through the speakers, amplified, clear, without trembling. My sister is right. Love is contagious. And the truth? Well, the truth is even more powerful. I saw my mother's smile falter. She knew that tone. It was the tone I used as a child, before I learned to bite my tongue, when I would point out that the numbers didn't add up. "Since we're celebrating new unions and the expansion of the family," I continued, my eyes fixed on my father's, "I'd like to offer an engagement gift to Sarah, something I discovered this morning." I raised the envelope. The silence that fell over the ballroom was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped. But that envelope didn't just contain un DNA test. It held a key to Pandora's box that, once opened, could never be closed. And as I slid my finger under the sealed flap, preparando to tear it open, I looked at Arthur. His glass was frozen halfway to his mouth. Did he know? No, he couldn't know that I knew. The first tear in the paper sounded like a gunshot, and it was at that moment I realized I wasn't just ruining an engagement. I was about to assassinate my family's image. The sound of the paper tearing reverberated through the sound system, raw and violent, contrasting with the polished elegance of the crystals and silverware. Time seemed to dilate, transforming each second into a drawn-out hour. I pulled the folded sheets from inside the envelope, smoothing them on the cake table, right next to the porcelain bride and groom who seemed to mock me with their static happiness. The smell of vanilla buttercream from the cake was sickening, mixing with the cold sweat I felt trickling down my back. "What is that, Audrey?" Sarah asked, her voice losing some of its manufactured sweetness. There was a hint of irritation now, as if I were a stubborn child ruining her favorite game. "A poem? Did you write a poem for us?" The audience laughed nervously. They wanted it to be a poem. They desperately needed it to be something cute and harmless to restore normalcy. But I wasn't there to offer comfort. I looked at Liam, who remained standing near our table, motionless. He didn't try to stop me. There was a silent trust in his eyes now, mixed with fear. He knew I would never make a scene without reason. He knew how much I hated conflict. If I was creating one, it was because the alternative was unbearable. "It's not a poem, Sarah," I replied, looking at the document in my hands. The colored lines of the ancestry charts seemed to vibrate. "It's science. Remember the DNA tests I gave for Christmas? Heritage and Roots? The one you said you'd throw away because you already knew you were perfect?" Sarah rolled her eyes, a performance for the audience. "Oh my God, Audrey, are you going to read my ancestry results? Did you find out I'm 2% Viking and decided to make a speech about it?" More laughter. Mom visibly relaxed, taking a long sip of her wine. She thought I was just being the nerdy and embarrassing sister. She thought the danger had passed. Actually, I didn't need your kit to know, I continued, my voice dropping a tone, becoming dangerously intimate, though amplified for 300 people. Since we are sisters, children of the same parents, our DNA should share about 50% identical genetic material. It's basic biology. 8th grade. I walked to the front of the stage, stepping out from behind the protection of the cake table. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to see the bride they had ignored all night. The curious thing, Sarah, I looked directly at her, is that when I received my results this morning, the close relative section was flashing red. There was an anomaly. Sarah's smile completely disappeared. She crossed her arms, a defensive posture I rarely saw in her. Oh my God, Audrey, are you going to read my ancestry results? Did you find out I'm 2% Viking and decided to make a speech about it? More laughter. Mom visibly relaxed, taking a long sip of her wine. She thought I was just being the nerdy and embarrassing sister. She thought the danger had passed. Actually, I didn't need your kit to know, I continued, my voice dropping a tone, becoming dangerously intimate, though amplified for 300 people. Since we are sisters, children of the same parents, our DNA should share about 50% identical genetic material. It's basic biology. 8th grade. I walked to the front of the stage, stepping out from behind the protection of the cake table. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to see the bride they had ignored. The curious thing, Sarah, I looked directly at her, is that when I received my results this morning, the close relative section was flashing red. There was an anomaly. Sarah's smile completely disappeared. She crossed her arms, a defensive posture I rarely saw in her. What are you talking about? My results show that we share DNA, yes? I said, making a calculated pause. The ballroom was so silent I could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. But not 50%. We share about 25%. Which, genetically speaking, usually indicates that we are half sisters. A low murmur began to spread through the tables like a wave in the ocean. Half sisters. The word hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Audrey, you're drunk, Mom shouted, standing up so abruptly that her chair fell backward with a crash. Turn off her microphone, now! Don't turn it off, Dad said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was authoritative. He sat, motionless, holding his whiskey glass so tightly his knuckles were white. He didn't look at Mom. He looked at me. There was a shadow in his eyes, an old suspicion that finally found light. Let her speak, Eleanor. Robert, are you going to let her ruin the family's reputation with this internet nonsense? Mom was hysterical now, red blotches of panic rising up her neck. If it's nonsense, there's nothing to fear, I said calmly. But that's not all, Mom. Half-sisters can happen in several ways. Maybe Dad had an affair. Maybe you had an affair. It happens. We're adults. I saw Arthur Henderson stir in his chair. He loosened his tie. Arthur had been Dad's best friend since college, their best man, the man who always gave me books as gifts, while giving jewelry to Sarah. For the pretty girl, he would say to her, winking. For the smart girl, he would say to me, with a pat on the head. I always thought it was just a personality preference. Now, the memory of those Christmases tasted like bile. But the website has this incredible tool, I continued, ignoring my mother's protests. It cross-references data with other users, and it seems someone very close to our family also took the test recently, perhaps out of medical curiosity or fear. I turned my gaze to Arthur. He was ashen. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a well-dressed corpse. Uncle Arthur, I said. And the name Uncle sounded like an insult. You're in the database, aren't you? Arthur didn't respond. He looked at my father. The silence between the two men was louder than any shout. It was a silence laden with 40 years of friendship, business, and betrayal. The test confirms. I read the paper, though I didn't need to. Father-daughter match found between Arthur Henderson and Sarah Miller. Probability 99.9%. Chaos did not immediately erupt. It was an implosion. I saw Sarah stumble backward as if she had taken a physical blow. She looked at Dad, the man who taught her to ride a bike, who paid for her college, who had walked her down the aisle in thought her entire life. "Dad," she whispered. It was the first time that night her voice sounded real, small, frightened. Dad slowly stood up. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at Eleanor. "Is it true?" Mom was trembling. She tried to reach for his hand, but he recoiled as if she were contagious. "Robert, it was just once."
"It was a mistake. We were going through a bad patch. You were traveling so much."
"Once?"
Dad laughed, a dry, terrible sound. "Once resulted in 26 years of lies. I raised his daughter, Eleanor. I loved his daughter more than—" He stopped and looked at me. The pain in his eyes was devastating. "More than I loved my own sometimes." That hurt. It hurt mais do que Sarah's betrayal at my wedding. The confirmation that I had been sidelined for a lie. But I wasn't finished yet. If it were just adultery, it would be a common domestic tragedy. But there were layers here, rotten layers that needed to be exposed so the foundation could be cleaned. Because the betrayal wasn't just sexual, it was strategic. I looked at Blake, Sarah's fiancé. He was petrified, holding Sarah's arm not with affection, but with confusion. Blake, the son of New York high society. Blake, whose family had deep financial connections with Arthur's and my father's firm. "This is shocking, I know," I said, retaking control of the microphone. "But Sarah, you always said you wanted a love that was in the blood. That you and Blake were soulmates, so alike it was frightening." I saw Blake's mother, an elegant lady named Patricia, stand up at the next table. She was looking at Arthur with an expression of absolute horror. She knew something. She knew something that connected the dots I was about to draw. "What do you mean by that?" Blake asked, his voice failing. I felt a pang of pity for him. He was as innocent in all this as I was. But the gangrene has to be cut out, even if it takes healthy tissue with it. "Uncle Arthur," I turned to him again. "Before you became Dad's partner, you lived in Boston in the 90s, right? During law school?" Arthur closed his eyes. He knew what was coming. "And Patricia," I looked at Blake's mother, "you had fertility treatment in Boston in 1995. At the Beacon Hill Clinic." The sound of breaking glass cut through the air. Patricia dropped her glass. The red wine spread across the white tablecloth like an open wound. "No," Patricia whispered. "It's not possible. It was anonymous." "It was," I confirmed, feeling my heart pound so hard it hurt my ribs. But the DNA database doesn't respect anonymity. It respects genetics. Arthur donated sperm at that clinic to pay off his law school debts. I let the information hang in the air. I didn't need to say it. The audience, intelligent, rich, and educated, did the math instantly. Sarah looked at Arthur. Then she looked at Blake, the man she had just kissed, the man with whom she planned to have children. "Oh my God!" Sarah put her hand over her mouth, rushing to the side of the stage and vomiting into the decorative bushes. Blake dropped her hand, as if it were burning. He recoiled, bumping into the cake table, knocking over the porcelain bride and groom figures, which shattered on the floor. The groom's head rolled to my feet.
I looked down at the decapitated porcelain head. "You are half siblings, Sarah," I said, my voice almost a whisper into the microphone, but it sounded like thunder.
"You share the same biological father." The room spun in un vortex de screams, cries. You sound the chairs being dragged. But what I saw in my mother's face was not shock. It was terror. Not the terror of discovery, but the terror of being caught. Because there was something in her eyes, a lack the surprise about the Boston connection. "Wait," I said, and the realization hit me like a freight train. A new piece of the puzzle clicked into place in my mind, something I hadn't seen in the papers, but that I saw now in my mother's body language. "You knew," I said, looking at Eleanor. She wasn't looking at Sarah vomiting. She was looking at the investors in the room, at the people who held the debts of Dad's company. "Mom, did you know Arthur was the donor?" If that were true, then the engagement wasn't just an incestuous accident. It was a calculated business transaction, where my sister was the bargaining chip and her genetic lineage was the hidden contract. "You knew," I repeated, and it was no longer a question. It was a sentence. The chaos in the ballroom had turned into a horrified silence, the kind of silence that follows an explosion, when ears still ring and the dust is still settling. My mother, Eleanor, was frozen, a marble statue dressed in navy silk. Her eyes darted from side to side, calculating, assessing damage, looking for an emergency exit that didn't exist. "Don't be ridiculous, Audrey," she hissed, but her voice lacked strength. It was thin, brittle like old glass. "How could I have known? That's absurd. You're making things up to hurt your sister because you're envious of her brilliance." "Envy?" I laughed, and the sound was strange to my own ears, bitter. "Mom, look at them." I pointed to Sarah, who was sobbing on the floor, curled in a fetal position, her champagne dress stained with bile and dirt, and to Blake, who was being embraced by his shocked mother in the opposite corner. "This isn't about my brilliance or hers. It's about the fact that you encouraged this courtship from day one. You forced the dates, you organized the dinners." I remembered the last 6 months, Eleanor's manic insistence that Sarah and Blake get together. "They're perfect for each other," she would say. "They intuitively understand each other." Now that intuitive understanding had a grotesque biological explanation: genetic sexual attraction. A rare but real phenomenon, where relatives separated at birth feel an overwhelming attraction when they meet as adults. My mother had mistaken pathology for destiny. Or worse, she had used it. "Why, Eleanor?" Dad asked. He had walked up to her. He seemed to have aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. His shoulders, always erect with pride, were slumped. "The betrayal with Arthur. I can understand human weakness, but this? Pushing Sarah toward his son? Why?" Mom looked at him, and the mask fell. The Savannah socialite facade melted, revealing a desperate, cornered woman. "Because we're broke, Robert," she yelled. The revelation hit the room with the force of a physical slap. The guests, many of them my father's business partners or competitors, held their breath. "What?" Dad blinked, confused. "The company had a bad quarter, but—" "Not the company," she spat the words. "Us, the personal accounts, the house, the vineyard, my gambling debts." My stomach churned. I knew Mom liked to play poker and bridge, that she took frequent trips to Atlantic City with the girls, but I never imagined the scale. I lost a lot, Robert, a lot, she continued, the words pouring out in a torrent now that the dam had broken. Arthur knew. Arthur covered some of my debts, but he couldn't cover everything without raising suspicion in the company's audit. We needed an infusion of outside capital. Blake's family, his trust fund, was the only way to patch the hole before the bank took this house, before they took everything. I looked at the high ceiling of the ballroom, at the chandeliers that cost more than my entire college education. Everything was a facade. The pearls on my neck, the expensive champagne, the perfection of the Hendersons, all built upon a swamp of debt and lies. "So you sold, Sarah?" I said. The phrase came out raw, unfiltered. You knew Blake was Arthur's biological son because Arthur must have mentioned the donation years ago, perhaps in an intimate moment, and you saw the opportunity to unite Arthur's two bloodlines, to keep the money in the family? Literally. I didn't know for sure, she defended herself, but it was a weak defense. Arthur mentioned the clinic once. I just connected the dots when I met Blake's mother. I thought, if they didn't know, what harm would it do? They didn't grow up together. Genetically, it's risky, but it's not like they're adoptive siblings. Love would solve everything, and money would save us all. "Oh, my God," Dad whispered. He looked at Arthur with a disgust I had never seen. "You knew about this, Arthur? You knew she was manipulating our children to cover her addiction's holes?" Arthur, who had been sitting with his head in his hands, raised his face. He looked like a man who had just woken up in a nightmare. "I knew about the debts, Robert. I paid what I could. But I swear on Sarah's life, I didn't know about Blake. I didn't know Patricia had used my material. It was anonymous. I would never have allowed it." Dad looked at Arthur. I saw the doubt. He wanted to believe his friend, but how could he believe someone who slept with his wife and fathered his favorite daughter? Sarah got up from the floor. She was trembling, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Mascara streamed down her face, turning her into a tragic painting. She walked over to her mother. "I was an investment," Sarah said. Her voice held no anger. It held something worse, understanding. "My whole life, the etiquette classes, the ballet, the right college, the clothes. It wasn't because you loved me more than Audrey. It was because it had a higher market value." "Sarah, dear, don't say that." Mom tried to touch her face, but Sarah recoiled. "Audrey always complained that you preferred me," Sarah continued, staring into space. "But you didn't prefer me, Mom. You polished me, like you polish silverware before taking it to the pawn shop." That sentence hit me in the chest. Suddenly, all my envy, all the years wishing I were Sarah, transformed into painful compassion. I was neglected, yes, but I was free. No one expected me to save the family. No one molded my personality to be sold to the highest bidder. I could choose Liam. I could choose my modest career in graphic design. I was the flawed daughter, and in that flaw, I found my humanity. Sarah was the golden child, and gold is a cold, heavy metal. "I'm sorry," I said, stepping down from the stage. I walked over to Sarah. She looked at me. For the first time in years, I saw my sister, not the rival. I saw the girl I used to play dolls with before Mom said I was too clumsy to touch the porcelains. "Did you know this was going to happen?" Sarah asked, pointing to the envelope still in my hand. "Did you know you were going to destroy me like this?" "I wanted to destroy the lie, Sarah," I replied honestly. "I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't know about the money. I'm sorry." "Don't," she said, and a strange, crooked smile appeared on her lips. "Look at them." She pointed to the ballroom, to the chaos, to the waiters collecting the shattered pieces, to the guests whispering, tweeting, spreading the news that would destroy the Hendersons' reputation forever. "It's over," Sarah said. "The pressure, the perfection, the wedding of the year. It's over." And then she did something no one expected. She started to laugh. Not a happy laugh, but a hysterical laugh of pure relief. She took the diamond ring from her finger, the ring Blake had given, the ring bought with the money that was supposed to save the family, and dropped it into someone's wine glass on the nearest table. Plop. The sound was tiny, but definitive. But the night wasn't over yet. There was one last domino to fall. Dad walked to the head table. He picked up the bottle of Chateau Margaux 1996. He looked at the label for a long moment. It was the year Sarah was born. The year he thought his family was complete. "Robert?" Mom asked, her voice trembling. Dad spun around and hurled the bottle against the wall, just above Arthur's head. The glass exploded, the red wine streaming down the cream silk wallpaper like arterial blood from a fatal wound. "Get out," he said. His voice was low, terrible. "All of you, get out of my party. Get out of my life." He wasn't talking to the guests. He was talking to Eleanor and Arthur. "Dad?" I tried to approach. "You too, Audrey," he said, without looking at me. "Take your husband and leave. I need all of you to leave." I hesitated. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to say I was sorry for dropping the bomb. But when I looked at his face, I saw a man who had just discovered his entire life was a fraud.
He didn't need solace. He needed silence to mourn the man he thought he was. Liam held my hand. "Come on, Audrey. He needs time." I looked at Sarah. She was standing in the middle of the ballroom, alone. Blake had already been dragged out by his horrified mother. Mom was crying in a corner, ignored by everyone. Arthur was motionless, covered in wine and shame. "Sarah?" I called. She looked at me. Her eyes were empty, but clear. "Go," she said. "Go have your honeymoon. Run while you can." I turned and started walking toward the exit, my white dress dragging through shards of glass and puddles of wine. I had exposed the truth. I had gotten my revenge. But as I walked down the aisle formed by the judging stares of Savannah's elite, the only thing I could think was, who am I now, if everything that defined me, my envy, my position in the family, my anger, has just evaporated? I was the avenger, but justice tasted like ashes in my mouth. The hotel exit was a blur of cell phone camera flashes and the muscled hum of gossip being transmitted in real time. Liam drove our rental car in silence through Savannah's cobblestone streets, the ancient trees with Spanish moss hanging like ghosts above us. I was still in my wedding dress, now stained with wine on the hem and crumpled from the weight of the night. We arrived at our Airbnb, a charming Victorian house that was supposed to be the setting for our first romantic night. Now it felt like a war refuge. I walked in, took off my heels, and sat on the living room floor, leaning against the couch. Liam locked the door, as if he could keep the chaos outside. "Do you want water? Tea?" he asked, crouching in front of me. He took off his tie, his movements slow and careful. "I want to know if I'm a bad person," I whispered. Liam sighed, sitting beside me on the rug. "You detonated a bomb, Audrey. People got hurt. But they built the bomb. You just lit the fuse." "Dad threw me out," I said, the image of his broken face returning to my mind. "I took away his illusion. Maybe the illusion was better. Maybe he would have been happier thinking Sarah was his and that Mom loved him." "The lie is never better, Audrey. It's just more comfortable." Liam held my hand, and comfort based on falsehood is a prison. At that moment, my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, but answered. "Hello? Audrey?" The voice was Sarah's. But it didn't sound like her. It sounded hoarse, tired, and there was a sound of wind in the background. "Sarah, where are you?" I felt a surge of adrenaline. "Are you okay?" "I'm on the bridge," she said. "The Talmadge Bridge." My blood ran cold. The Talmadge Memorial Bridge loomed over the Savannah River, tall and imposing. "Sarah, listen to me," I said, getting up, signaling Liam to grab the car keys. "Don't do anything. I'm coming there. Please, Sarah." "Don't be dramatic, Audrey." She let out a weak laugh. "I'm not going to jump. I just needed air. The air in the hotel was poisoned." "I'm coming to get you," I insisted. "Don't leave there." The drive to the bridge was the longest of my life. Liam drove, violating all speed limits. When we reached the top of the bridge, I spotted the champagne dress gleaming under the yellowish road lights. She was leaning against the guardrail, looking down at the dark water below. The wind was blowing her perfectly styled hair, now a tangled mess. The car stopped and I jumped out. "Sarah!" She turned around. Her face was clean of makeup, washed by tears or rubbed hard. She looked raw. "He left me," she said simply as I approached. "Blake, he sent a text message, didn't even have the courage to tell me to my face. Said his mother forbade any contact and that he's going to Europe tomorrow." I stopped beside her, keeping a safe distance, afraid of scaring her. "He's your half-brother, Sarah. There was no way it could continue." "I know," she looked at her hands, "but it hurts. Not because of the incest. God, that's disgusting. But because I realized none of them liked me. Blake liked the image. Mom liked the investment. Arthur liked the biological memory. And Dad liked the lie. I like you," I said. The words came out before I could filter them. Sarah looked at me with skepticism. "You hate me, Audrey. You've spent your life hating me." "I hated what you represented," I corrected. "I hated the shadow. But now there's no more shadow. The sun burned everything away." She sighed, turning to the water again. "You know what's funny? When you started talking, when you said I wasn't Dad's daughter, for a second I felt relief." "Relief?" "Yes, because it explained everything. It explained why I always felt like a fraud in that house. Why I felt I had to perform perfection all the time to deserve my place. Deep down, I think I always knew I didn't belong." She turned to me and touched the pearl necklace on my neck, the same necklace I had felt suffocating me earlier. "Those pearls look better on you," she said softly. "They need a strong neck. Mine was always made of glass." It was at that moment that the final barrier fell. The anger I had carried for decades dissolved, not into instant forgiveness, but into mutual understanding. We were both victims of Eleanor's ambition and Robert's blindness. We were two pieces in a chess game neither of us knew we were playing. "Come with me," I said, extending my hand. "You can't go back to Mom's house, and Dad needs space." "Where will I go?" she asked, her voice like a lost child's. "To my Airbnb. The couch is awful, but there's cold pizza and no one to judge you." Sarah hesitated. She looked at the river, then at me, and then, for the first time in 26 years, she took my hand not to guide me or overshadow me, but to lean on me. We got into the car. Liam looked at us through the rear-view mirror, his eyes kind. As we drove down the bridge, Sarah leaned her head against the car window. "Audrey?" "Yes?" "That DNA test? Was there anything else?" I took a deep breath. There was. One last thing I hadn't said into the microphone, because it wasn't relevant to the scandal, but it was crucial for us. "There was," I said.
In the genetic traits section, it said, "We both have a propensity for high resilience in high-stress situations." Sarah laughed, a genuine sound. I guess science got that one right. That night, we all slept in the living room. I on the couch, Sarah on an improvised mattress on the floor, still in her party dress because she refused to ask her mother for clothes. The silence in the house wasn't heavy. It was the silence of a battlefield after the cannons stopped firing. I looked at the ceiling, thinking about my father. Where would he be? Thinking about Arthur, thinking about Eleanor. The destruction was total. But sometimes you need to demolish the condemned house before you can build something that stands on its own. I closed my eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't dream of being Sarah. I dreamed of the future. A complicated, messy future, full of lawyers and therapy, but a future that was, undeniably, true. Resolution didn't come the next morning, nor the next week. There wasn't a magical moment where everyone embraced and the credits rolled. Real life is much more bureaucratic and painful than movies. The following months were a blur of legal proceedings. Dad filed for divorce 3 days after the wedding. It was ugly. Eleanor's financial betrayal, combined with the paternity fraud, gave his lawyers enough ammunition to leave her with practically nothing. She moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of Charleston, and, as far as I know, started attending Gamblers Anonymous groups, although she still sends me sporadic messages blaming my outburst for her misfortune. I don't respond. Forgiveness is a process, and I'm still on the first step. The company was dissolved. The partnership with Arthur, obviously, ended. Arthur sold his share and moved to Europe, perhaps to escape the shame, or perhaps to be near the biological son he can never acknowledge. Dad retired. He bought a small house on the coast, far from the country clubs and the society he used to value so much. I visit him every Sunday. The first time I went to see him, 6 weeks after the Red Wedding, as Liam affectionately nicknamed it, I was terrified. I found him on the porch, looking out at the sea. He looked thinner, but his shoulders were no longer slumped. "Dad?" I called. He turned. There was a moment of hesitation, and then he extended his arms. The hug was strong, desperate. "I'm sorry," he whispered into my hair. "I'm sorry for not seeing you. I was so busy admiring the false reflection that I didn't see the real gem." We cried. It was strange to see my father cry, that stoic Southern man, but it was necessary. We talked about Sarah. "I don't know how to talk to her," he admitted, serving iced tea. "Every time I look at her, I see the betrayal. I see Arthur." "She's not Arthur, Dad," I said, holding his hand. "She's Sarah, the girl you taught to fish. Biology is just a technical detail. Fatherhood is what you did every day." "I know," he sighed.
My head knows, but my heart is still broken. It will take time. And Sarah? The golden child had the hardest fall. Without a family money, without the rich fiancé, and without the identity she wore as armor, she had to reinvent herself. She sold her designer clothes, her sports car, and rented a studio apartment. She got a job at a bookstore. I went to visit her yesterday. It had been exactly 1 year since the wedding. The bookstore smelled of coffee and old paper. I found Sarah in the children's section, organizing a shelf. She was wearing jeans, sneakers, and a simple t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked ordinary, and she had never looked so beautiful. "Hi," I said. She turned and smiled. Not the practiced beauty pageant smile, but a smile that reached her eyes, creating expression lines she used to cover with preventative Botox. "Hi, Odd," she replied. "Did you come to buy a book or check if I'm still alive?" "A bit of both." We walked to a nearby cafe. We sat at an outdoor table, watching people pass by. No one looked twice at her. She was no longer the Henderson heiress. She was just Sarah. "Did you talk to Dad?" I asked. "He called me on my birthday," she said. "It was strange, brief, but he said, 'I love you,' before hanging up. I guess that's a start." "It's a start," I agreed. Sarah looked at me. "You know, I have that photo, our wedding photo, before everything exploded, when we were getting ready." "Burn it," I suggested. "No," she laughed. "I framed it, put it on my bedside table." "Why? It was the worst day of our lives." "It was the day I was born, Audrey," she said seriously. "Before that, I was Mom's ventriloquist dummy. When you broke the glass, you cut the strings. I fell flat on my face, yes, it hurt like hell. But now I walk on my own 2 feet." She reached her hand across the table and held mine. Her hand was rough, with a small paper cut on her finger. A real hand of someone who works. "Thank you," she whispered. I squeezed her hand back. The symbol of my journey, that heavy pearl necklace, I had returned to the velvet box at the back of my closet. I didn't need it anymore. I no longer needed symbols of patience. "Family is a funny thing, isn't it?" I said, looking at the blue Savannah sky. "Sometimes you have to dismantle it piece by piece to discover what's real and what's just scenery." "And what's left?" Sarah asked. I looked at her. My sister. Half-sister by blood, whole sister by survival. "Us," I replied. "We're left, and I think that's enough." Healing isn't a straight line. There are days when the anger returns. There are days when I miss the ignorance, when everything seemed perfect and Sunday dinners were peaceful, even if false. But then I look at my life now, at the brutal honesty I have with Liam, at the fragile but true relationship with my father, at the real friendship I'm building with Sarah, and I know it was worth it. Truth is an acid. It corrodes everything that isn't real. But what's left is pure gold. Not the false gold of the golden child, but the gold of authenticity.
And that's the only kind of wealth no one can take from us. And you, what do you value mais? The fragile peace of a comfortable lie, or the painful chaos of a liberating truth? If this story touched something deep in you, if you've ever felt like a shadow in someone's life, or if you've had to break family chains, subscribe to the channel. Share your story in the comments. Remember, You are not defined by your family's secrets. You are defined pelo que você faz após elas ser reveladas. You are stronger than you think.